This story is titled, Parents Raised My Rent to Support, Deadbeat Sister Boyfriend. So I left and now they are begging me for help. Hey, first-time poster here. I'm Alex, 23 male, and things have been pretty chaotic in my life recently. I don't usually share personal stuff like this, but I need to vent and hear your opinion. I'm currently in college and grinding my way through life with a full-ride scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. I live at home with my parents, which sounds great on paper because it's rent-free, but trust me, it's not as easy as it sounds. See, I've got a sister, Kara, who's 25 female and the certified golden child of the family. And when I say golden child, I mean she can screw up royally, and my parents will find a way to spin it like she's the second coming of Christ. Let me paint you a picture. Growing up, Kara could do no wrong. If she brought home a C on her report card, my parents would celebrate it like she'd won a Nobel Prize. She tried her best, they'd say. Meanwhile, if I got a B instead of an A, it was, "What happened, Alex? You're smarter than this." Kara was the type who barely lifted a finger at home. Chores? Not her thing. If she didn't do the dishes, my parents would shrug it off, saying, "Oh, Kara must have been so busy with her friends." But if I forgot to take out the trash, it was a whole lecture about how I needed to be more responsible. It doesn't stop there. Kara had this ex-boyfriend, Greg, who was the absolute worst. He was manipulative, controlling, and quite frankly, a user. Greg had Kara wrapped around his finger, and she couldn't see it. He would borrow money from her constantly, guilt-tripping her about how he needed help to get back on his feet. Guess what? He never did. Kara worked a decent job for a while, but every dime seemed to end up funding Greg's shady ventures, like his failed music career and random trips with his buddies. What's worse is that when I tried to point out Greg's obvious manipulation, I was told to stay out of it because I didn't understand their connection. My parents? They weren't much help. They'd brush it off with, "Kara's a grown woman. Let her make her own choices." Which, fine, fair enough. But when Greg eventually dumped her and left her in financial ruin, guess who my parents leaned on to pick up the pieces? Me. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Kara growing up. She wasn't mean to me or anything. But the favoritism was hard to ignore, especially as we got older. While I was busting my ass in school, Kara was coasting through life. She barely passed high school, didn't bother with college, and started working at random retail jobs that never lasted more than a few months. My parents, of course, always had excuses for her. "She's just figuring herself out," they'd say. When I got my scholarship and started college, I thought maybe things would finally shift. I mean, I was doing everything right, getting good grades, working hard, planning for my future. But nope, Kara was still the star of the show. When she got a job at a boutique last year, my parents acted like she'd been elected to Congress. "She's working so hard," they gushed. Never mind that the boutique barely pays her minimum wage, and she spends half her paycheck on clothes she doesn't need. When Kara finally moved out into her own apartment, I was relieved. I thought, finally, some peace and quiet. But that didn't last long. It started with little comments from my mom. "Kara's having a hard time with her rent," my mom said one evening while we were watching TV. She sounded hesitant, like there was more she wasn't saying. I just nodded, figuring it wasn't my problem. "She's trying so hard, but things are just so expensive," my mom added. "Yeah, I guess," I said, not really paying attention. Then, a few weeks later, the real conversation happened. My parents sat me down at the dining table like we were about to discuss some life or death situation. "Alex, we've been talking," my dad started. "Uh-oh," I said, half joking but already feeling a sense of dread. My mom jumped in. "You're doing so well in school and we're so proud of you. You've got that scholarship, you're working hard. You're really setting yourself up for success." "Thanks," I said, still unsure where this was going. "Well, Kara's struggling right now," she continued. "Her rent is really high, and her job just doesn't pay enough to cover everything." I frowned. "Okay, and?" "We were thinking," my dad said, "since you're saving so much with your scholarship and you're living here rent-free, maybe you could help her out a little, just for a few months until she gets back on her feet." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You want me to pay Kara's rent?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. "She's your sister," my mom said, as if that explained everything. "She's an adult," I replied. "Shouldn't she figure it out herself?" "She's trying, Alex," my dad said, his tone turning stern. "Not everyone has the same opportunities you've had. You're in a position to help, and it's only fair." "Fair?" I shot back. "How is it fair that I'm working 2 jobs and going to school full-time, And now I have to pay for Kara too. You're being selfish, my mom said, shaking her head like I'd just kicked a puppy. If the situation were reversed, Kara would help you. I seriously doubted that. We argued for what felt like hours. I told them it wasn't my responsibility, that I was already stretched thin, and that Kara needed to learn how to manage her own life. But my parents wouldn't budge. She's your family, my mom snapped. You'd let her drown while you swim? She's getting a raise soon, my dad added. It's just 3 months. She'll pay you back. At that moment, I told them I will think about it, and went to my room questioning myself. How much am I supposed to give? 3 months might turn into 6, then a year. If Kara keeps struggling, or spending, will I be expected to keep bailing her out? What I'm really trying to figure out is if I'm wrong for feeling this way. Should I just bite the bullet, pay her rent, and avoid any drama? Or do I have a right to feel like this whole situation is unfair? I've always been the one to keep the peace in the family, but this is pushing me to my breaking point. I'm tired of always being the one to sacrifice while Kara gets a free ride. And that's where I'm stuck. Do I stand my ground and risk blowing things up with my family? Or do I keep quiet and let the resentment keep building? If anyone's been through something like this, I'd really appreciate hearing how you dealt with it. When I make my decision, I'll post here. Stay tuned. Update 1 point. Okay guys, it's your butt, Alex. So, eventually, I caved. My parents didn't exactly leave me much of a choice. They kept piling on the guilt, saying things like, Kara would do the same for you, or, you're in a position to help, Alex. It's what family does. So, yeah, I agreed. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument, and maybe helping her out would keep the peace. But now, sitting here and looking at the bigger picture, I'm starting to feel like I've been set up. From the moment I started sending her money, Kara acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. Not a single thank you, no acknowledgement that I was making sacrifices to help her out. Instead, she kept doing what she always does, posting Instagram stories of her latest shopping hauls, brunch outings, and fancy coffee drinks that cost more than my daily lunch budget. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself, maybe she's using her own money for that stuff. Maybe she's cutting back in other areas. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to believe. Last week was the tipping point. Kara posted a story of herself at a spa with the caption, Self-Care Weekend. Self-care? I'm working 2 jobs and covering her rent, and she's taking spa weekends? That's when I decided to ask my mom about it. So, Kara's rent is all covered now, right? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yes, thank you for helping her, my mom said, clearly pleased with herself for orchestrating this. Cool, just wondering. Does she, need more help? I asked. What do you mean? Well, I said, choosing my words carefully, she doesn't seem very stressed. I mean, she's been shopping and going to spas. Doesn't really look like someone who's struggling. My mom gave me a look like I'd just insulted the Pope. Alex, she's allowed to enjoy herself. Just because she's having a hard time doesn't mean she can't take a break every now and then. Sure, but how is she affording all this? I pressed. She's using her own money for that. You don't have to micromanage her life. Micromanage? I'm the one paying her rent, and I don't get to ask questions? I let it go, but the frustration was bubbling over. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. Kara was supposed to be broke. I kept checking her social media. Her Instagram captions were vague, almost like she didn't want anyone to ask too many questions. Living my best life, one post read. It didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I wasn't trying to control Kara's life. I just wanted to understand how this situation made sense. But whenever I asked about her struggles, she'd dodge the question or change the subject. It's just complicated, she'd say, which only made me more suspicious. But I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with Mom, so I dropped it. That conversation planted a seed of doubt in my mind that only grew stronger with time. I started paying closer attention, looking for anything that might explain how Kara was living so comfortably despite her supposed financial struggles. One evening, I was at my parents' house again when I overheard Kara on the phone. She was in her old bedroom, talking in a hushed voice. No, I told you, I'll send it tomorrow, she said. Just stop freaking out, okay? I froze. Who was she sending money to? Wasn't I the one covering her rent? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I remembered something my cousin Matt had mentioned a few weeks earlier. Did you know Kara's been hanging out with Greg again? Matt said casually during a family barbecue, leaning against the counter. I frowned. Greg? Her ex? Hi. Matt shrugged. Dunno. Saw them at that coffee shop by her place. Looked cozy. He paused, then added, You ever notice Kara's been acting weird? Weird how? I asked, narrowing my eyes. I don't know, he said, taking a sip of his drink. She's been way more private than usual. Like, she's hiding something big. I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. What could Kara possibly be hiding? Greg was supposed to be ancient history, a deadbeat who'd mooched off Kara for years before she finally dumped him. Or so I thought. The way Matt mentioned him, almost like it wasn't over, gnawed at me. I ignored it then, but now I wish I'd paid attention. I decided I needed to dig deeper. That night, I went home and opened up Venmo, searching for Kara's account. I felt a little guilty snooping, but I justified it by telling myself I had a right to know where my money was going. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were multiple consistent payments to Greg. The captions were vague. For groceries. You owe me one. Thanks again. I stared at the phone screen, trying to realize my money wasn't going to Kara's rent, it was going to her ex. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was, working overtime and cutting back on everything just to help her, and she was using it to support someone who'd already taken advantage of her once. I spent the rest of the night stewing in anger and disbelief. I don't know whether to confront her immediately, or should I calm down and think it through. This isn't about the money anymore. It is about the lies. I actually have a lot of questions to Kara, and most probably will confront her. I'll keep you updated. Update 2: Hey, Alex here again. Things blew up way more than I expected. I wasn't planning on making a huge scene, but when you get pushed to your limit, it just happens. A quick side note, my cousin Matt, the guy who knows everyone's business, is the only person in my corner right now. He's been hearing me vent about all of this, and even warned me about Kara hanging out with Greg again. He convinced me to confront her, saying, if you don't handle it, she'll keep walking all over you. She's used to you keeping quiet. So, armed with frustration and Matt's encouragement, I decided to talk to Kara face to face. That weekend, Matt came with me to Kara's apartment. I needed backup, someone who could keep me grounded if things went sideways. When we got there, her car was parked outside, so I knew she was home. Matt gave me a nod, and I knocked on her door. Kara opened it, looking surprised, and not in a good way. Her eyes darted between me and Matt, her body stiff. What are you guys doing here? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. We need to talk, I said. She sighed, glancing back into her apartment. Now's not a good time, Alex. Too bad, I said, stepping inside before she could stop me. Matt followed, closing the door behind him. Her apartment was tidy, but the tension in the air was thick. Kara crossed her arms, her expression guarded. What's this about? I wasted no time. Greg, her face paled. What about him? I know you've been giving him money, I said, my voice calm but firm. The money I've been sending you for rent. I've seen the payments, Kara. Don't lie to me. Matt stood by the door, arms crossed, giving her a look that said, don't even try to weasel out of this. Kara's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she scoffed. Wow, Alex, snooping through my Venmo? Classy. Don't deflect, Matt cut in. Just answer the question. She glared at him before turning back to me. Fine. Yes, I've been helping Greg. He's in a tough spot, okay? A tough spot? I said, my voice rising. Kara, are you kidding me? Greg is the reason you were broke in the first place. And now you're taking my money to bail him out? You don't get it, she snapped. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd freak out like this. Of course I'm freaking out, I shouted. I've been working 2 jobs to help you, and you've been lying to me this whole time. Lying? I didn't lie, she said defensively. I just didn't tell you. That's the same thing, I said. Do Mom and Dad know about this? She froze, her face flushing. Number, and they don't need to. Oh, they're going to, I said, turning toward the door. Alex, wait, she said, panic creeping into her voice. No, I said firmly. I've had enough of this. Matt and I drove straight to my parents' house. On the way, he kept saying, you're doing the right thing. They need to know the truth. Kara can't keep playing the victim. When we got there, my parents were in the living room watching TV. I walked in, not even bothering to sit down. We need to talk, I said. My mom muted the TV, looking concerned. What's going on? It's about Kara, I said, my voice steady. She's been lying to all of us. She's not struggling to pay her rent. She's been giving money to Greg. My dad's eyebrows shot up. Greg? Her ex? Yes, I said. The same guy who used her for years. She's been taking the money I've been giving her and funneling it to him. My mom's face tightened, and for a moment, I thought they were going to be angry at Kara. But then she sighed and said, Alex, I think you're overreacting. I blinked. What? She's been lying to us. She's trying to help someone she cares about, my mom said. You don't know what Greg's going through. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What Greg's going through? What about what I'm going through? I've been working nonstop to help Kara because you guilted me into it, and now you're defending her? Alex, calm down, my dad said, his tone firm. Kara's your sister. Family helps family. Are you serious? I said, my voice breaking. You're really going to side with her after everything she's done? She's not perfect, my mom said, but she's doing her best. No, she's not, I said, my anger boiling over. She's been lying, manipulating, and taking advantage of me, and you're letting her get away with it. Enough, Alex, my dad said, his voice sharp. This conversation is over. I looked at them, my chest heaving with frustration, and realized something I'd been avoiding for years. They were never going to hold Kara accountable. Fine, I said, grabbing my keys. If you won't do anything about it, I will. I stormed out, Matt close behind me. When we got to the car, he turned to me and said, well, that went about as expected. Yeah, I said bitterly. They'll never change. After a few days, the pounding on the door pulled me away from the sink where I was rinsing out a coffee mug. It was late. My parents were sleeping, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so the sound alone was enough to put me on edge. When I opened the door, Greg stood there, looking like hell, unkempt, swaying slightly, and reeking of sweat. What the hell do you want? I asked, gripping the edge of the door. Greg pushed past me without answering, brushing crumbs off the arm of the couch before dropping onto it like he owned the place. He tilted his head back and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, as if he'd just come from some great battle. Kara's not answering her damn phone, he said finally, glaring up at the ceiling. Yeah, she doesn't live here, I snapped, closing the door harder than necessary. Why are you here? Greg ignored my question. She thinks she can just cut me off like that. Keep my kid away from me. Nah, not happening. I froze mid-step, my pulse quickening. What are you talking about? He tilted his head toward me, a crooked grin spreading across his face. Come on, Alex. Don't play dumb. You know. I didn't respond. Greg sat up straighter, his grin widening, when he realized I genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. She didn't tell you, huh? He said, almost gleeful. Of course she didn't. Wouldn't want to ruin her perfect little story. Tell me what? I demanded, my voice sharp. Greg leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Your dear sister, he said, dragging out the words, has a kid. My kid. 2 years old. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at him. He leaned back against the couch, watching me like he was waiting for the explosion. You're lying, I said finally, though my voice lacked conviction. Greg barked out a laugh. Yeah, that's what she'd love you to think. But no, man. It's the truth. She's been paying me to keep it quiet. Doesn't want the world to know she's not as perfect as mommy and daddy like to think. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Kara had a child, and she'd kept it a secret from everyone, including me. Greg rubbed his face and sighed again, this time with exaggerated frustration. I mean, she's got you footing the bills, doesn't she? Living the high life while keeping me out of my own kid's life. It's bullshit, man. His words hung in the air, thick and heavy. My stomach churned as the pieces started to fit together. Her defensiveness. Whenever I asked about her finances, her response was always the same. It's complicated. She'd snap if I pressed her, her face turning red as she muttered, you wouldn't understand. Back then, I thought she was just embarrassed. Now I wonder if she was hiding something bigger. But now I know better. The money going to Greg, the Instagram posts of brunches and shopping trips. She's sending you my money, I said, more a statement than a question. Greg shrugged, smirking. Guess you're not as clueless as I thought. The rage bubbled up before I could stop it. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. Get out, I growled. Greg stood slowly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Fine, fine. I'm leaving. But you tell Kara she doesn't get to rewrite history. This isn't over. I opened the door and stood there, glaring at him until he stumbled out into the night. The silence in the house felt suffocating after he left. I sat on the edge of the couch, my mind racing. Kara had a child. She'd lied to everyone about it, not because she was scared or ashamed, but because it was inconvenient for her. According to her Instagram, she was living her best life, keeping her mess secrets while taking money from me and using it to keep Greg quiet. This wasn't the behavior of someone struggling to get by. Kara wasn't struggling. She was coasting, using everyone around her to maintain her cushy lifestyle. And worst of all, she dragged me to her own shit. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. The anger simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. I called Matt, the only person I knew who wouldn't sugarcoat things. Greg showed up at the house last night, I said as soon as he picked up. Why? Matt asked, his tone already skeptical. He was drunk, ranting about Kara, about their kid. There was a pause. Their what? She has a kid, I said bitterly. 2 years old. She's been paying Greg to keep it a secret. Matt let out a low whistle. Man, that's messed up. And your parents don't know? Of course not, I said. If they did, they'd probably still find a way to defend her. Oh, she's doing her best, I mocked bitterly. Matt didn't laugh. You're right, though. They'll defend her no matter what. But Alex, this isn't something you can let slide. She's been using you. That's not just shitty. It's cruel. I know, I said. And I'm done. Good, Matt said firmly. So what's the plan? I didn't answer right away. My mind was already spinning, calculating my next move. Kara had spent her entire life getting away with everything because people like me let her. That was about to change. She thinks she can keep walking all over me, I said finally. But she's about to learn how wrong she is. And I meant it. This wasn't about making peace or keeping the family together anymore. It was about making sure Kara faced the consequences of the life she'd built on lies and manipulation. For once, she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. I've got something clever in mind, just to make sure they think twice before messing with me again. Wait for my next update if you're interested. Update 3.0. Hey people, it's Alex again, and I'm here to spill the tea. Well, as I was planning my next move, the eviction notice landed like a thunderclap. I hadn't meant to open it. It had been addressed to Kara but delivered to my parents' house. I found it sitting on the counter, the envelope already half torn. Would I miss this opportunity to know more about Kara's mess? Hell nah. I slid the letter out. My eyes scanned the lines. Months of unpaid rent, complaints from the landlord, and the inevitable conclusion. Kara was being kicked out. I placed the letter back on the counter, a mix of anger and grim satisfaction simmering under the surface. This was her mess. She'd made it. But I knew how this would play out. Kara would spin this, and my parents, as always, would rush to cushion her fall. When Kara arrived that evening, her bag slung over her shoulder, she moved through the house with her usual air of indifference. She barely greeted me as she dropped her things on the kitchen counter and helped herself to a cup of coffee. The eviction notice was still where I'd left it, its presence screaming in the silence of the room. I waited. She saw the envelope, paused, and then, without hesitation, ripped it open. Her eyes flicked over the letter, and her face barely changed. She let out a frustrated sigh, tossed the paper onto the counter, and grabbed her cup as if nothing had happened. It was her usual tactic. Ignore the storm until someone else cleaned it up. My parents came in shortly after, their voices cheerful until they saw Kara's expression. My mom picked up the letter, her hand trembling slightly as she read it. My dad hovered over her shoulder, his face tightening as he absorbed the words. They didn't say much. My mom placed a hand on Kara's arm, murmuring something comforting, while my dad stared at the letter with a clenched jaw. The energy in the room shifted as they quickly fell into their usual roles. Kara the victim, my parents the saviors. I stood in the corner, watching the whole charade play out, my fists clenching at my sides. Within days, Kara's bags were back in her old room. The move was seamless, orchestrated by my parents with a quiet efficiency that made my stomach churn. They didn't even mention the eviction to me, like it was some unspoken agreement that I didn't need to know. But the truth had already started to unravel. The final piece came when I overheard my parents talking in hushed voices late one night. The words "child" and "Greg" cut through the walls like a knife. My stomach dropped as I realized they knew. They'd known all along. About the child. About Greg. About everything. And they hadn't told me. They only used me. The next morning, I made my move. Quietly, carefully, I gathered every piece of evidence I had. Venmo transactions, screenshots of Kara's Instagram, showing her frivolous lifestyle, notes on every excuse she'd ever given me. And then I made a call to her landlord. The woman on the other end was polite but firm, clearly frustrated with Kara's antics. She listened carefully as I explained what I knew, that Kara had been funneling money elsewhere while ignoring her rent. The landlord thanked me, her tone shifting as she realized the depth of Kara's deception. Kara's landlord wasted no time filing a formal complaint, tightening the screws on the eviction process. Kara's reaction was predictable, storming around the house, slamming doors, muttering about how unfair it all was. My parents rallied around her, offering comfort and excuses, their focus solely on Kara while ignoring the chaos she'd left behind. I stayed out of their way, my silence a pointed reminder that I wasn't playing along this time. When my mom finally cornered me, asking for help to get Kara back on her feet, I just shook my head and walked away. The last time I saw Kara, she was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. My parents hovered nearby, discussing plans to help her find a new apartment, offering to cover her expenses until she got back on track. I packed my things that day, leaving the house with a clear conscience. Let them deal with the fallout. Let Kara learn what happens when her lies finally catch up to her. For the first time, I felt no guilt as I walked away. She'd burned every bridge, and I wasn't about to rebuild them for her. This time, she was on her own. I don't know what the future holds. I will probably post for you one final update to let you know if things settle or worsen. Final update. Hey, it's Alex again. I figured I owed you all one last update since things have finally settled. It went exactly how I expected. After the eviction notice and everything that followed, Kara moved back in with my parents. They acted like it was some heroic act of selflessness, even though it was the most predictable outcome ever. My mom and dad immediately fell into damage control mode, bending over backward to make sure their golden child was comfortable. They cleaned out her old room, stocked the fridge with all her favorites, and even took time off work to help her adjust. Meanwhile, Kara acted like she was doing them a favor by being there. Not once did she acknowledge the mess she'd made, or the lies that got her there. As for Greg, he kept up his nonsense. Apparently, he's been threatening legal action for custody of the child, but Kara's handling it the same way she handles everything, with avoidance and denial. My parents, of course, believe every word she says about how Greg's just trying to make her life miserable. Funny how they never stop to ask why she kept any of this a secret in the first place. My parents did try to drag me back into it, though. My mom called me a week after Kara moved in, her voice full of forced optimism. "We're all pulling together to help Kara," she said, like it was some noble crusade. "We could really use your support, Alex." "Support?" I said, trying not to laugh. "You mean money?" There was a long pause before she admitted it. "She just needs a little help getting back on her feet." "You're doing so well, Alex. And it's what family does." "Family?" I said. "You mean the family she lied to? The family she manipulated for years while spending my money on Greg and God knows what else?" "Alex, she's your sister," my mom said, her voice taking on that disappointed tone she always uses when she doesn't get her way. "She's trying." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "She's not, and I'm not bailing her out again." I hung up before she could guilt me further. Now, weeks later, I've stepped back completely. I haven't been to the house, haven't answered their calls, haven't engaged in their drama. Kara's still living there, still letting my parents handle her problems while she does the bare minimum to stay afloat. The difference is, I'm no longer part of it. For the first time in years, I feel free. No more guilt, no more enabling, no more being dragged into messes I didn't create. I'm focusing on myself, my school, my jobs, my future. I don't know if Kara will ever change. Honestly, I doubt it. My parents will probably keep enabling her until she's 40, and still blaming everyone else for her problems. But that's not my problem anymore. Thanks for sticking with me through this mess. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away, even if it's from family. Take care, everyone. Alex.